watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's top stories. Used car dealers in Lebanon are calling on authorities to reopen car inspection centers across the country. Lebanon is preparing to commemorate the country's 73rd Independence Day after 2 years without celebrations due to the country's political gridlock. And WHO says all hospitals in Syria's Aleppo are out of service after days of heavy airstrikes. Used cars dealers in Lebanon have called on authorities to reopen car inspection centers across the country, arguing that used car showrooms traders were subjected to daily financial losses due to the closure. The Used Cars Traders Union was echoing a similar demand by Lebanese Public Drivers Union, which criticized the closure of inspection centers a day before, denouncing the actions of the union and leagues of land transport. Walid Francis, head of Used Cars Traders Union, has called on Interior Minister Nuhad Mashnouk to issue a decision that would allow traders to pay fees to register vehicles without undergoing inspections. A 17-year-old cancer patient was finally able to meet her idol, President Michel Aoun. Hayat Hennawi, who is battling cancer at the St. Jude's Children's Cancer Center, headed with her mother Hala and her siblings Fatima and Hussein to Babda Palace to meet with Aoun. The visit was arranged by Tamanna, a non-profit association that grants wishes to children with critical illnesses. Hennawi was overwhelmed by the meeting, saying she loved Aoun since she was a little girl. She expressed faith in the president's ability to make a difference in Lebanon. Aoun, according to his press office, was pleased to meet with Hayat and answered all of her questions. Dial Al-Fil, founder of Tamanna, said Hayat's joy when she met with Aoun gave her a moral boost. Lebanon is preparing to commemorate the country's 73rd Independence Day after 2 years without celebrations due to the country's political gridlock. For the first time since the country's presidential vacuum in 2014, Lebanon will hold a military parade after the election of the country's 13th head of state. President Michel Aoun, Speaker Nabih Berri, Prime Minister-designate Saad Hariri, high-ranking security officials, politicians and other dignitaries will attend the ceremony that will be held on Tuesday on Shafiq Wazan Avenue in downtown Beirut. All hospitals in Syria's besieged rebel-held eastern Aleppo are out of service after days of heavy airstrikes. This is according to its health directorate and the World Health Organization. However, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said some hospitals were still operating in the besieged parts of Aleppo, but that many residents were frightened to use them because of heavy shelling. ISIS has killed 7 Sunni tribal fighters who support the Iraqi government and 5 policemen in a town south of Mosul. ISIS has escalated attacks on forces and officials opposed to its rule as it fights off a military campaign to retake Mosul, the largest city in the caliphate, declared in 2014 over parts of Iraq and Syria. A Saudi Arabia-led coalition supporting Yemen's government against Houthi rebels has declared a 48-hour ceasefire that began this morning. Saudi Arabia's official SBA news agency said the truce could be renewed if Houthi fighters and their allies abided by it and allowed aid into besieged cities. The coalition move came after a request for a ceasefire by Yemen's President Abdrabbu Mansour Hadi, himself based in Riyadh, to Saudi King Salman. Coming up next, a 4th mass rally against South Korea's Park Geun-hye in Seoul. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Spanish police have arrested 2 Moroccan citizens in Madrid and Barcelona on suspicion of recruiting young people as Islamist militants via the internet. Since Spain raised its national security threat alert in 2015 in response to Islamist attacks in Paris, police have arrested 163 people suspected of militant activity. German markets have become a staple on British high streets at Christmas. But will Brexit make it harder for them to trade here in the future? Emily Wyther reports from the opening of the Frankfurt Christmas market in Birmingham.
We may be none the wiser on a Brexit timetable, But it hasn't hampered Christmas celebrations in central England, where the countdown to Christmas has officially begun. The market is part of a partnership between Birmingham and Frankfurt that spans half a century. They've been together longer than Britain and the EU, and the man behind organising the 140 stalls here says they're not breaking up anytime soon.
It will be more difficult after Brexit, if it is there, and I think then we will have regulations between Germany or the EU and Great Britain that it is possible to work not too difficult.
Organisers insist it's business as usual, but it may be a tough sell in years to come. If the British government has to impose visas and permits, stallholders like Tom may decide it's not worth the hassle. They're considering taking the business to somewhere like Spain next year.
A lot of stallholders will say, okay, that's it. I mean, my boss starts to think about to stop it here, especially after the Brexit, so there are also other people thinking about that.
We are very worried because you don't know what the future brings. The Germans feel bad for the English people. It's the same like we feel bad for the Americans with Donald Trump.
Despite the June referendum, people are still spending. British retail sales rose at their fastest annual rate in more than 14 years in October. And while the city of Birmingham may have voted to leave the EU, organisers are keen to stress its friendship with Frankfurt hasn't lost its sparkle.
World leaders have arrived in Lima, Peru, where leaders of Pacific Rim nations scrambled to find new free trade options as Donald Trump's looming presidency sounded a possible death knell for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. While campaigning for the presidential election, which he won, Trump labeled the TPP a job-killing disaster and called for curbs on immigration and steeper tariffs on products from China and Mexico. Well, still on the topic, undocumented immigrants in Los Angeles have long taken comfort in the city's status as a haven for people fearing deportation for entering the United States illegally. Local police have made it a policy not to check the immigration status of individuals under arrest and share that information with federal authorities who could act to deport them. But with the election of Donald Trump, who pledged during his campaign to deport all of the country's 11 million undocumented immigrants and threatened to withhold federal funds from sanctuary cities, some illegal immigrants in the U.S. have begun seeking legal advice.
The election has drummed up a lot of fear. I think we've come to the point as a community that we are now become revitalized. In the sense, even me as an advocate, I'm ready to fight. But also it's really motivated the community to come out and educate themselves, educate themselves as to what forms of relief is available to them. That's why we have so many people coming to us now, people who were afraid to even come forward for a consultation. They're also educating themselves as it comes to their rights and coming together to determine, hey, worst case scenario, if I do get removed from the United States, what's going to happen with my property, what's going to happen with my family, what's going to happen with my children. So we're getting ready.
I did speak to one of the lawyers on the side. I asked her what I should do regarding the application process, and like they had mentioned, I should hold off on giving any kind of information, personal information of myself. So what I'm going to do is meet with them on a one-on-one basis, see what they can do for me, and then take it from there. So meet with the lawyers first.
I'm going to stay very positive through everything that's going on, but I feel it on my chest, and days go on, DACA might be taken off. I get really scared because I work at the school and I come to school and I'm just afraid am I gonna have to go look for a job somewhere else?
Doing the work that I do, so things like my clients, my family, my culture, a lot of them have come forward and said now the government, we filed, the government has my information, what can they do about it? Is this going to have an impact on my immigration case? If the event that they have a criminal conviction, am I going to get deported right away? It's a lot of uncertainty and fear that I'm sensing, and we're here to remind them yes, Trump can say all these things and what he wants to do, And unfortunately, the people that he's appointed on his transition team are people who are very much bark and bite. But immigration law, to change it, that still is something that belongs to Congress. That's there. They have to do that. So the fundamental immigration law won't change. There can be a shift in policy, but you know, I've told them, like, we're going to do whatever is necessary to ensure that we protect you, or that your rights are at least protected.
Moving on to Asia, thousands of anti-government protesters have marched in Malaysia's capital demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Najib Razak over his alleged involvement in a multi-billion-dollar corruption scandal. Clad in yellow shirts and unfazed by arrests of activists and opposition leaders, protesters marched from various spots towards downtown Lumpur amid tight security. Najib, who is attending the APEC summit in Peru, has kept an iron grip since graft allegations emerged 2 years ago involving the indebted 1MDB state fund he founded. 1MDB is at the center of investigations in the U.S. and several other countries. Similarly, tens of thousands of protesters have gathered in South Korea's Seoul for the fourth in a weekly series of demonstrations aimed at forcing President Park Geun-hye to resign over a corruption scandal. Today's protest came as Park's approval ratings plunged, with prosecutors planning to interview her, making her the first sitting South Korean president to be questioned in a criminal case. The scandal centers on Park's shadowy confidant Choi Soon-sil, who is accused of using her ties with the president to coerce local firms to donate millions of dollars to non-profit foundations that Choi then used for personal gain. Light therapy could help avoid colony collapse disorder in bees, which some scientists say threatens much of the world's food supply. British scientists are developing a simple, inexpensive infrared light treatment that could reinvigorate ailing colonies. The research also offers hope for people suffering from early-stage macular degeneration. Jim Drury reports.
The honeybee is the world's greatest agricultural pollinator. But colony collapse disorder is blamed by some scientists for falling bee numbers, leading to fewer crops. Overuse of pesticides is often cited as a likely cause. University College London ophthalmologists say they have a solution: near-infrared light therapy. Professor Glenn Jeffrey set up 4 hives, each containing 400 bees. 2 groups were exposed to a common pesticide for 10 days. One of these was also treated with light.
In the colony that hasn't had the light, the animals are rather grey, they're pasty, and they move around in balls. If you look at the group on the other side that's had the 670 nanometer light as well, you find they're moving around in a relatively normal way, they're beating their wings, and we can't tell the difference between those and bees that haven't been poisoned.
Jeffrey says the group treated with light therapy without being poisoned had a better survival rate than the control group. This suggests preventive treatment before exposure to pesticides could be beneficial. Some scientists say colony collapse disorder risks future human food supplies. Others disagree and say bee numbers are fairly stable. Jeffrey has received funding to create an inexpensive commercial device for use in hives. His team is also conducting an intriguing study on a potential future preventive treatment for human macular degeneration, the leading cause of vision loss among the elderly.
We actually take a very, very simple device that's extremely economic, and all we ask people to do is actually to put it over one eye for 1 to 2 minutes every day. We measure their visual function beforehand, and we measure their visual function after we've done it. And there, when we do our tests very carefully, we find that there is an improvement in vision, particularly your ability to detect a very, very small light in the dark. That is where we find an improvement in retinal function.
The bee colony study was published this month in peer-reviewed scientific journal PLOS ONE. Jeffrey hopes his team's findings will create a lasting buzz.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a recap of our top stories. Used car dealers in Lebanon are calling on authorities to reopen car inspection centers across the country. Lebanon is preparing to commemorate the country's 73rd Independence Day after 2 years without celebrations due to the country's political gridlock. And WHO says all hospitals in Syria's Aleppo are out of service after days of heavy airstrikes. Those are your top stories for this Saturday. I'm Linda Tamim, wishing every man out there a very happy International Men's Day.